led nonprofit, and the mission of the organization is to foster positive youth development through education and activities. These informational events provide a safe space to connect parents and the community to other area partners, organizations, resources, and information to help forward productive conversations around challenging topics and to continue to develop important skills and assets for youth today and in their future. For our larger group today, we are going to have questions via the chat to help keep the general noise from this large of a group on a virtual meeting together. So if you have anything, you can definitely submit things there throughout the event. And thank you to everyone that attending that submitted questions in advance. If your questions were related to specific policies or practices of outside organizations, as a community nonprofit, we are unable to speak on behalf of those community partners, but hope to provide enough resources to help you best forward those topics with the appropriate parties at a later date. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce our speaker for this evening, Heidi Moore. Heidi is an experienced equity, diversity, and inclusion practitioner with more than 20 years of experience in leading corporate and community strategies in the business-to-business, clinical, consumer goods, durable goods, financial services, healthcare, hospitality, IT, resort, and wealth management industries for Fortune 500 and Forbes' largest organizations. Her work includes efforts in the areas of business, clinical, community engagement, consumer experience, human resources, marketing, operations, organizational development, research, sales, talent, and executive development. Currently, Heidi is the Director of Emerging Markets, Diversity and Inclusion at Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin Regional Health Network. And Heidi partners closely with the marketing, communications, supply chain, and community engagement departments to develop strategies to expand market share in the diverse communities served. She also partners with clinical leaders, the executive team, and staff to provide culturally and linguistically responsive care for all patients of the health network. And I'm also privileged to work with Heidi on a number of projects, as I also do work with Froedtert in the Medical College. And I'm really excited for you to really meet and get to know her as well today. In addition to her professional life and education, Heidi has a Bachelor of Arts degree and completed her master's requirements at Columbia College in Chicago. She currently serves on the boards of Beckham Stapleton Little League, National Hispanic Corporate Council, United Way Diversity Leadership Council, and Walnut Way. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Heidi and excited to have her share some information and resources with you all today.
Wow, thank you so much, Jenny. So good evening, everyone. I have to tell you, Jenny, that, you know, when I was younger, like listening to all that stuff sounded really, really cool. But as I'm getting older, it's just making me feel way much older. So, but thank you so much for sharing my background. And also, you know, a lot of these virtual events would not be possible without people behind the scenes. So I also want to thank Michaela, too, because she's been involved with helping us to get ready for this evening, and she's behind the curtain right now. So good evening, everyone. So I'm honored to be here. This topic is just something that, well, you'll hear about it as we have stories, but it's just a part of my life and always has been. And so I get really thrilled and excited to be able to share that part of my life with me, but even more importantly, how these sometimes challenging conversations around diversity, inclusion, equity, equality, race, racism, and many others, how sometimes they can be difficult, but absolutely they impact all aspects of our lives, whether we know it or not. And so today, hopefully we can have a conversation, have some dialogue. I have some information to share with you to get us started. But really, I'm hoping that this could really be a dialogue. So just one housekeeping thing for me. I think I'm doing a really good job right now looking at the camera, but I have to tell you, all of you are over here. So sometimes you may see, I have 3 screens, so sometimes you'll see my eyes going elsewhere, but please know that I'm here with you the whole time. All right, so if we could go to the next slide. Thanks, Jenny. So, you know, as I was preparing, I was really thinking about, so why does a conversation like this matter, right? I had a chance to take a look at the Facebook page. I had a chance to take a look at the promotional, like, flyer and all of that, and take a look at the topic, and just started asking this question. And to be quite honest with you, with all of the organizations that I've worked for, including Froedtert. This is a question that I'm constantly asking, not only myself, but I constantly ask in partnership with my colleagues. And so when I took a look at your organization, one of the things that I took a look at is your purpose, right? And so on the about us side are really some key bullet points, or some key topics, I should say, around the purpose and the work that is being done. And so let me give you an example here. So Germantown Youth Futures exists to promote positive youth development and growth. So that's one of the reasons why a conversation like this is very important. Also, understanding that our youth are our future. That's something that I have an opportunity to have a conversation with many people about all of the time. And so again, a conversation like this becomes really important. Young people themselves want to work on solutions, but see few opportunities for meaningful involvement. So once again, especially, and hopefully I have an opportunity to share with you one of my experiences when I was at the Kohler Company. If you're familiar with Kohler as a village, Sheboygan as a city, and the Kohler Company, then I think, you might acknowledge that there are some similarities between Germantown and Sheboygan and Kohler. And so through that experience, one of the things that I was able to talk about and to share and to help educate others on is that life in Kohler for the high schoolers, for the junior high school students, once they go off to college, as many of them will do, the world is a much different place. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. The time for action is now, and that is absolutely true. I think we're all living that. And then success of Germantown Youth Futures depends on the commitment of concerned people like you. And so because you're here, I know that you're concerned. We're all concerned. And so thank you so much again for joining for such an important topic. So the next thing that I typically do when I'm working with organizations is I take a look at the demographics. What's so interesting for me when I did this exercise in preparation for today is it reminded me that I haven't been to the Census Bureau's website, which is where I typically take a look at the demographics, in a long time. And the reason for that is because we have some amazing folks like Jenny who work in this department, and this is the work that they do. So for most of the time I've been here at Froedtert, I haven't had to do that, but it was really fascinating work. It's work that I really enjoy. And so really quickly, here's the reason why I take a look at the demographics. The world has changed. And it's so interesting because as I've been presenting while doing this work for now, almost, 20 years, actually over 20 years, and I've done this work across the country, I've done this work globally, I've done this work nationally, and then definitely across the state. And so I remember being up north, working with organizations like Kimberly-Clark, or working with organizations that are in not only Fond du Lac, but Oshkosh as well, or Green Bay. And I remember doing these presentations like 10, 15 years ago saying the world has changed and it's going to continue to change. Well, now 10, 15 years ago, the world is still continuing to change. So the world is changing, the country's changing, our state and region are changing. And in fact, Germantown is changing, especially from a demographic standpoint. So what was interesting when I went to the Census Bureau is I took a look at 1990. Here's the reason why. Because 1990 was the first time, I'd say the big census year where those of us who do equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and at that time I wasn't doing it full time. I actually was on committees and that kind of thing while I was, leading teams. And so in any case, but 1990 was the first time when there were such large demographic shifts that many people started paying attention. 2000, however, and for those of us who were living at that time, if you recall, there was a lot going on in 2000. In fact, we thought all the computers were going to shut down once the year hit 2000. But in any case, the other thing was happening is with the 2000 census, that is the first time when the demographics started to show that, so one of the fastest growing minority groups, which is the language used at that time, minority groups are those who identify as being Hispanic. 2010 was the time in which Hispanic, there was a lot of discussion about the use of the word Hispanic. And so now some people identify as Hispanic, others identify as Latino. And 2010 census helped us with that. But in Germantown, here's what's so interesting. While the rest of the country and a lot of the other areas were changing, including in 2000 when some states like California and Texas, some cities became majority minority cities. In Germantown, you can see the statistics for the most part were pretty much the same. 4.3% of people of color, and we'll talk about what people of color includes, but who identify from a race standpoint, race and ethnicity standpoint, and then 95, almost 96% white race. And the same was true in 2000, a little difference in 2010, but 2020, based upon some recent data, and we'll go to the next slide to see that, but in 2020, 10.7% people of color and 89% white race. So demographics are changing. The world is changing, and it will continue to change. If we can go to the next slide, Jennifer. Thank you. So this slide, and I won't go into all the details, but here's what this slide sort of tells me. Germantown is made up of a well-educated group of folks. Germantown is also those who, and these are all generalizations, of course, everyone doesn't fit into this, but based upon the demographics, there's discretionary money that's, can be used on healthcare in a great way. That's something that Froedtert cares about. Germantown is a part of Washington County, as you know, and Washington County is a part of Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin regional healthcare system. Try saying that all the time. That's what I do. But it's a part of our service area. And so anyways, you're spending money on healthcare. You're spending money on, I'm just trying to see, sorry, it's a little bit small here. Oh yeah, but on apparel, and you're spending money on computers and electronics and all that kind of stuff, and you're spending money eating out. And I so get it because there's so many great restaurants out here. So in any case, that's how you're spending money. However, when I take a look at other parts of the service area, those demographics are different. And so I just wanted to call out, this is why we pay attention to the demographics. The other thing that I paid attention to were the employment rate and then also income levels. And this will all make a lot more sense once we get into some of our additional discussion. So then if we go to the next slide, I wanted to share with you a little bit in regards to, so why does a conversation like this matter to Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin? I'm not going to go into, I have a full presentation actually about, 40 slides that could get into this. I'm not going to get into all of that today, but I do think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, your health matters to us, and the health of all of the people that we serve matters to us. And so this conversation, regardless of which organization I'm speaking with, like you tonight, or organization that I'm working with, such as all the ones that Jenny mentioned, but in addition to that, I have over 100 partners, community organizations, and other organizations similar to ours that throughout the year I'm working with. So no matter which organization I'm working with, the fact of the matter is this conversation we'll have tonight ties to and aligns with all of our mission. So for Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin, if you take a look at our mission, it's Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin advances the health of the diverse communities we serve through exceptional care enhanced by innovation and discovery. And many of you have probably experienced healthcare with us, and so you probably, hopefully, had that type of experience. One thing I want to point out here, though, is the word diverse was actually recently added to our mission. And so you might say, why? Because even before we added the word diverse, communities we serve, we were all very clear based upon the demographics that the communities we serve are diverse. So we always were making sure that we were executing on our strategies to address a diverse community. But we felt that the conversation we're having today is so important that even for our mission, which many of you probably know, organizations rarely change their mission, but even for our mission, we wanted to call it out. We wanted to make sure. So that's, and you can see our values there, but this conversation aligns with all our values. Can we go to the next slide, please? Just one final thing about Froedtert. If nothing else, I do hope, before we move into the rest of the evening and the primary purpose for our conversation today, but I do think I would be remiss if I did not just sort of acknowledge the fact that Froedtert is actually really, really committed to this conversation. And even more importantly, the actions after the conversation. And so what you see there is something that is posted in all of our hospitals to demonstrate our commitment. It also is posted in the vast majority of our clinics. It will be in all of the clinics. But we have made a commitment to eradicating racism and enhancing health equity. And the one thing that I really wanted to point out here is if you see what actions are we taking, the very first action is we're examining our own biases. Here's why I wanted to call that one out. You can see measurement, of course, organizations measure. You can see treating people with dignity and respect. That responds and is an alignment with our mission and vision. And then leading change in the communities that we serve, because we're one of the largest private employers in the area. So that absolutely is something we're responsible for as well and committed to. But examining our own biases is actually an action step for us individually as well as a collective. And it actually is, after we have the conversation, that's really the step that we are taking here internally at Froedtert. So if we could go to the next slide. Enough about Froedtert. You won't hear me talk about Froedtert anymore. So why does this unless you ask me to, but why does a conversation like this matter to me personally? And so you probably can't see the words that are in my name there, Heidi Evita. And maybe we'll get to the story of how did I even get this name, because for some of you, so here's what you'll learn about me. I tend to be pretty transparent, and I love having like candid conversations, so I'm just gonna go there right now. So for some of you, you may have seen my name, Heidi, and my skin color, this might be the first time that you've seen a Black Heidi. And here's the thing about it, and here's why I say that. I have traveled and done work across the country, and the number of times, no matter what city I'm in, people have shared that with me in conversation is quite significant. And it doesn't surprise me anymore. When I was growing up, it surprised me, but, and again, stories about that, but it really was research that was done by the University of Chicago that took a look at names and the impact that names have on how employers, even employers like Froedtert, employ people, how outcomes in school, just the impact of names. And so my name has become a part of actually this work that I do. And so just thought I'd call it out now. But inside of my name there are words such as I'm a mom, I'm a wife. Well, I was a wife until recently, but I definitely still a partner. I'm a community member, I'm an employee, I'm a professional, I'm a student. You know, right now I sort of feel like I'm employing my kids as I'm trying to have them, you know, do chores for all the money that I'm giving them. But in any case, I'm a professional, I'm a student, I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I'm a sister, I'm a cousin, I'm a niece, I'm a homeowner, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a consumer, I'm a board member, I'm an educator, and I could go on and on and on. The reason why this conversation is so important to me is because the topics in our conversation impact all aspects of my life. And I would suggest that they impact all aspects of all of our lives. Just some of us, just maybe for whatever reason, don't have to pay attention to it as much as others of us. And we'll talk about that as well. If we could go to the next slide. So this is your opportunity now to sort of, I've been talking for a while, so just to sort of help me get a sense of what are you thinking right now? And even more importantly, why does a conversation like this matter to you? So I think the way we're going to do this, unless Michaela tells me otherwise, is if you can just chat the answer to that question, that would be great. And then Michaela will just share some of the answers, not necessarily your names, but just some of the answers so we can get a sense of what would be the best way to use the rest of our time for this conversation. So why does a conversation like this matter to you? Any responses yet, Michaela?
Not yet.
All right. So I don't know how many of you are educators. However, I have learned to be patient. So let's see how at least get a few responses so that we can see, again, why does a conversation like this matter to you? And even if it doesn't matter, why doesn't it matter? But I think it matters because you're here.
Learn about my own biases and grow.
Great, thank you for that.
Because the children in Germantown are watching.
I'd be interested to learn more, watching what we do as adults, or watching what's happening in the world, or watching us now because they're on this call. But thank you for that.
This person says yes, yes.
Okay,
I believe
great.
it's one of our educators on the call, so.
Okay, yes, that's right. Yes, thank you. Any other comments?
Learn how to have the conversations,
Mm.
to have sincere conversations with my own kids, as well as the kids I work with at Children's Wisconsin, to be a good role model for those around me. And then I want my community to be a place for everyone, in all caps, to be safe, work, learn, and live.
Wow. Wow.
And someone else shared concern of the direction it will go with the children.
Yeah. Yep. Wow. Well, thank you for that. If we don't have any others, then I think we've got enough to really help us with our conversation. And hopefully you'll feel a bit more comfortable as well once I'll go through a few more slides, like definitions and that type of thing. And then hopefully please feel free to ask any question. For those of us who are educators, we have this saying of no question is, a stupid question, right, or a dumb question. But in addition to that, I hope that you feel comfortable enough asking me truly any question, because this is the time when we can really have some deep conversation to explore things that maybe you know, or maybe you think you know, or maybe you don't know that you don't even know. So, all right. So then let's go to the next slide, please, Jenny. Okay, so, we could spend the whole time together going through lots of definitions. There are so many resources out there, so many that I actually cut out a lot of the resources because all of the resources, it's like you could go to a resource and then it's like, it's so deep. So I did include a few resources at the end, and definitely feel free to, my contact information can be shared. So feel free to reach out if you'd like, to even have more discussion and more resources about something specifically. But I did think that the definitions for these terms, for us to at least cover them briefly, just to sort of lay the ground for our discussion. So these are some of the terms, and these are, some of the terms that are actually included. Not only like we're talking about it, having a conversation, these are actually incorporated into a lot of our strategies at Froedtert. But in addition to that, these are a lot of the terms that I'm having conversations with my friends, having conversations with my kids, having conversations, with some of the boards that I'm on. I mean, these terms, as you know, you've been watching the news and you've been engaged in conversation as well. So let's talk a little bit about these definitions. So if we go to the next slide. So the first two are about diversity and inclusion. And there's a lot written here. Initially when I was thinking about tonight's presentation, one of the things I was going to do is I was going to pull some definitions of diversity and inclusion from a variety of organizations. Sometimes I actually really like utilizing the dictionary, but in my mind, I already had planned on not using the dictionary because until recently, which you'll see here, but until recently, the dictionary really, none of them had great definitions for diversity and inclusion. And to my surprise, the dictionary folks are catching up. So this first phrase is one that hopefully is a way for you to just sort of remember. It's a clever way for some of us to remember the differences between diversity and inclusion. So diversity is about counting people. An example of that as an employer would be, hey, let's take a look at a department. How many, people do we have that identify as Native American, or, the Native people or the original nation? How many people do we have that identify as Black or African American? How many? And we do that for patients as well. Now, there are reasons for us to do that work. One, if we want to take a look at, are we inclusive at our executive level, and we can see visually that we're not, well, let's take a look at where everyone is, right? By race and ethnicity, by gender, and other categories, people with disabilities, that type of thing. Let's take a look, and then let's map out a plan on how we can start to remove barriers, help to gain access to careers and career choices that will help us ultimately have an executive team that is more multicultural, that is more representative of the communities we serve. So that's some of the reasons why folks are counted. But here's the thing. There's research that shows that diversity, there are some organizations that just focus on diversity, and then once they had this multicultural workforce, they never focused on inclusion. And therefore, the talent that they recruited started to depart. Lots of turnover started to happen. Why? Because folks did not feel included. Inclusion is about insisting that the people who are counted are really count. So another way that sometimes this phrase is says is diversity is about the mix of people, where inclusion is about making the mix work. So however whatever phrase you end up latching onto, in any case, hopefully that'll help you to understand the differences between diversity and inclusion. I also did include the Merriam-Webster version of the definition of both of those, and you'll have this presentation so you can go in there and you can read it. I won't read it now, but what I will say is I was really pleasantly surprised to see just the definitions here, and not only that, they give examples as well. So next slide, please. So now let's talk about equality and equity. And some of these slides may be very familiar to you, or some of these graphics, but let me just talk a little bit about this one. So the top one gives a demonstration of, equality. So the premise of equality is around, hey, as long as we make sure that everyone has access to the same thing, then we're doing a great job. And then we'll be able to help to make people feel counted, or make sure that people are counted, right? Or in other words, make sure that the mix works. And so whereas equality is really around truly understanding that we have a history. As a country, we have a history. As a world, we have a history. But in our country, a very distinct history. And what has happened within our country's history is that we have systems in place, systems that impact the education system, systems that impact healthcare, which is why I love doing the work that I do, systems that impact even as a consumer. So all aspects of living well, and all the systems that make up, that we have access to as human beings to live well. Well, those systems, however, are based upon the history that when we get to race and racism, we'll talk a little bit more. And so here's what that means in regards to equity. So in regards to equity, it really is, as you can see there, making sure that for those who maybe didn't have access, in this case, not access to viewing, making sure that we remove barriers or create a way in which for those to really have access, or to view, or to engage, or to be included, whichever words you like to use. Down below, I won't spend as much time, but that example down below with the bicycles and the wheelchair is an example that we've been using quite a bit. Our health equity leader here at Froedtert's been using. And the gist of that one is that, again, for equality, hey, equality is give everyone the same kind of bike, right? Regardless if they're in a wheelchair or if maybe they're tall and the height of the bike. We're not paying attention to any of those things. We're basically saying everyone gets the same thing. Whereas equity is really about acknowledging the us as individuals, our individual needs, and therefore making sure that we all can enjoy the bike ride together. And so just really quick, being a parent, being an educator, I used to actually work for Milwaukee Public Schools while I was in college. And so I work with young people and all of that. So I like stories, and I like analogies and all of that. So I was really thinking about this deeply. And I was thinking about, in the top picture, the person who is in the purple shirt, right? And on the right-hand side with the equity, what I was thinking about is, imagine that being the first time that the person was able to see the full baseball field and the full baseball game. Imagine what that experience must have been like. And similarly with the bicycles, right? So the person who uses a wheelchair and then now has a bicycle or a cycle that can help the person move, or even the person who is the taller person, right? And so now that person has a bicycle that is better for that person's size. And so imagine, having a hunch over, and then what if your back is hurting and you're hunched over all the time? Are you really paying attention to all the wonderful things that the rest of us maybe see on the bicycle ride, such as the trees, the birds, whatever life brings us? But now, being on a cycle, you don't have to worry about whatever that impairment was or whatever you didn't have access to. Well, imagine all of those kind of feelings being a student who maybe for the first time is joining Germantown, but prior to that was in a different school system that maybe didn't have access to all of the things that the Germantown school system has. Imagine what that experience might be like for that person, especially if it's a new experience. Imagine here coming to work. Many times I'm meeting with those who are first generation graduates of college, and many times they are people of color. And so I remember there's a community leader in Milwaukee. Some of you maybe have even connected with her, but she shared most recently that when after graduating from college and she got her first job, that was her first time having private or commercial insurance. And so because it was her first time having commercial health insurance, she didn't realize what she had access to. And in addition to that, because her health suffered for that, because a primary care physician, what is that? That's not something she had experience with. So anyways, I could go on and on and on about this graphic, but we've got other definitions. So I'm gonna move on. I just wanted to give you some practical examples though, of why understanding the differences between equality and equity really is important for all of us to understand. If we could go to the next slide. So we're almost at the Q&A part, so get your questions ready, hopefully. So let's talk about race and racism. Out of all these definitions, probably the discussion about race and racism are probably the two, terms that are probably maybe the most emotionally charged at times. Definitely can be, some of the harder definitions to have discussions about. And so I want to spend a little bit more time there, and then we'll get to the Q&A. And so, I'm sorry, I want to make sure, I made some points because I could go on, and I just want to make sure that, oh, here we are, okay. I want to make sure that I cover the points. So that was so rude of me to bend my camera, but hopefully I'll make up for it as we go through these points. Okay, so first, just a few things, maybe like trivia kind of things. I won't read all of this, but one of the things that, well, even before I go there, I'm going to switch some of this content around. In June last year, 2020, so after the murder of Mr. George Floyd, obviously there were lots of organizations, lots of people, lots of action and dialogue taking place. I suspect that all of us were engaged in dialogue, and all of us were watching the news, and all of us were reading the newspapers, and there's so much going on, including conversations with our kids. And so in any case, I found myself, especially here at work, but then in addition to that, in community conversations regardless of the race and ethnicity of the person, I found myself asking two questions. And the answers to these two questions have been so helpful for me, especially in the last 15 years, as I've been talking about race and racism. And so those two questions, the first one is, so we'd have a conversation, I could see people getting really emotional, and I could see, people being puzzled, or I could see people being emotional because the heart, is very painful in just seeing what's happened, and painful waking up. For some folks were waking up to say, wow, I didn't realize that this was going on. In any case, here are the questions. How much do you know and understand about the history and the science of race? And then the second question is very similar, but different. How much do you know and understand about the history and science of racism? And so I think all of us probably could answer either one of those questions and say, oh yeah, I know, because we've been living our lives, right? And so race and racism have been a topic, maybe just not as major as it's been most recently, but there have been other times in history when it's been a significant topic. And so many of us would probably say, oh yeah, but I really challenge all of us to ask ourselves those questions, and then hopefully our answers will drive us to truly go and understand and learn about the history of race and then also the history of racism. And here's the reason why. I think when more of us truly understood the history and science of race and the history and science of racism, our conversations would be conversations that could move us forward. That's the reason why I've been asking these questions. I've seen this play out in doing this work at all of the organizations that I've worked at. And so even today with Froedtert, okay, I said I wouldn't bring it up, but even today with our commitment to eradicating racism, I have lots of colleagues who are like, that's so huge, how can it happen? But I'm telling you, at every organization I've been at, when I'm able to go through this process with groups of folks or with individuals, on the other side of it, I've had colleagues who have told me, I want nothing to do with diversity and inclusion. And on the other end of it, they are now removing barriers. They are helping and having conversations like never before that they never thought that they would have. So I just share that. Okay, so here's to get us to a little bit of trivia. So did you know that race is actually a modern idea? And you can read the rest of it, but the gist of this is that even in 1508, when the first time that in this country race was brought up, it really was speaking in regards to like kings over in Europe and that kind of thing. Because slavery actually predates race. So if that's not a cliffhanger for you, I don't know what could be, but slavery predates race, meaning that I think a lot of us, as we think about history that we learn in school, and so even for myself, I just sort of thought slavery and race went hand in hand, but no, that's not the case. Slavery actually predates race, and so hopefully that gets you to, then how did that happen kind of thing. And then race has no genetic basis. And that's part of the reason why I asked the question around the history and the science of race, because when you start getting into the science, then you start really learning the science and you're like, oh my goodness. So anyways, so if we could go to the next slide, because we're almost at question time. So here are the definitions from, the dictionary. Again, I won't read them, although I will tell you, I think they're really, really good. But from a race standpoint, there's two approaches to it, or there's two ways of having conversation. And I think a lot of us for race, and then also for the concept of racism, even more so for the concept of racism. So for race, it really has to do with, commonly defined as the social construct, which categorizes people who share certain inherited physical characteristics such as skin color, facial features, and structure. And many times it's related to the term ethnicity, which really from an ethnicity standpoint, that has to do with people of color and others with distinct cultural heritage. And so a lot of times right now, especially with the US Census, you'll see race, Black, white, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander, but then you'll also see ethnicity, so are you white Hispanic or non-white Hispanic, for example. Eventually the Census Bureau, I think, is gonna figure it out, but for a lot of people, they use race and ethnicity interchangeably. I typically say race and ethnicity, but then racism is really, there's two different approaches to it. So racism from an individual standpoint, right? And that's where sometimes you'll hear the word racist, right? Because racism is based upon behaviors, the behaviors that we demonstrate based on race. And so, so sometimes then that leads to people may behave a certain way, and then others may perceive that as, oh, that's based on race, and then that leads to the term of racist. However, there's this other aspect to racism that, to be quite honest with you, is the work that Froedtert's doing, and it also is the work that I think is the bigger work, and that work has to do with systemic racism. So it's all of our systems and how our systems have been built based upon race. So again, as you explore the answers to those questions, then you'll start to dig deeper into all of that. So with our last 15 minutes or so, let's do some Q&A if we can. I think that's the next slide. Let's have some dialogue. Yes. So hopefully I've given you some time and given you some information to ponder And let's see, Michaela, are there any questions or comments or thoughts? You can, again, say anything. It doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment or a thought, anything like that.
There isn't anything yet.
All right. Well, the educator just come out, and I'll just wait.
So my background's in substance use prevention, and we often talk about like how to have a conversation between parents and kids. I guess, do you have any tips for starting this conversation with children or adolescents that would make it, exploratory but also comfortable?
Yeah, so so let me share a couple of experiences of me as a parent, but then also I can share just me in the practice. But I think, thank you, one, for sharing that. And my laughter was about, yeah, I wish it could be comfortable, right? And sometimes it can be. I'd say my conversations with my kids are typically comfortable. They weren't always comfortable, but they're comfortable because we've continued to have dialogue. And I'll share with you some specific examples in a moment. But here's how I sort of look at it in regards to the comfort piece. When I first, so I've been walking a lot during this pandemic, but when I first go to the gym, and I haven't been to the gym in a long time, it might feel okay. No, actually it doesn't. It doesn't feel comfortable at all, regardless of what I'm doing, because it's been a while. And then it really doesn't feel comfortable that next morning when I wake up, because I stretched muscles that I hadn't stretched in a while. Or I may have stretched muscles that I've never stretched before, right? Or I may have tried the weights and I hadn't done the weights in a while. And so it feels uncomfortable. But I know that I have to continue to practice. I have to continue it, because over time, it will become more comfortable. And that is how this conversation works. The conversation works where we have to start somewhere. And so, I would say in regards to how do you start it, you can start it naturally, wherever, because there's so much to talk about. You'll never run out of how to talk about or what to talk about. So you can start naturally. And, when my kids were younger, it had to do with them, first realizing that they were different. So so our family is African American, but I grew up in a multicultural world. So that's the other part to this. I really love doing this work because the vast majority of my experiences have been multicultural. With that being said, I'm also very used to being the only one person of color, being the only woman at times as well in large groups of people. So I've had all of those experiences, and I have family members that live in different situations as well. So I've experienced it all. But I'm so fascinated by culture and multiculturalism because the vast majority of my time was multicultural. For my kids, it wasn't as much. And so with my kids, it really had to do with when they first realized that they were Black and Black meant something. And so that was an uncomfortable conversation. Sometimes, I have 4 kids. So depending upon, how old they were, the conversation could be really, really uncomfortable because they're so young. But I would just say there's so many resources out there, and I could share, depending upon the age or whatever, I could share more with you as to how to start the conversation. But having the conversation in a natural way is really a good way to start. And then just one final point. So a lot of times when I do diversity, equity, diversity and inclusion education, a lot of times I like to partner, I like to co-facilitate. And the reason I like to co-facilitate is there's one, while the other person's facilitating, then I could be paying attention to what's going on in the room, and then I can jump in if something's missed, or I can jump in to acknowledge what's in the room. The other part to me, co-facilitating, is most times I co-facilitate with someone who is of a different race. And if they're a different race and a different gender, that's even better, because not only are we able to then model the conversation, but in addition to that, we're able to just, we're able to model how to partner, and we're able to just help create an experience that a lot of people don't have. So here's why I bring that up. One of the people that I've co-facilitated with tons is a gentleman. He's an attorney by trade. And he also happens to be identifies as a man and also identifies as white man. And so many times when he would tell his story, and he lives in Minnesota, one of the things he would share is that he would share that growing up for him, he was taught to not see difference. So anytime he would see someone that maybe was Black or Latino or someone that maybe was in a wheelchair, anyone that was different, many times his parents, and he'd point as a young person. He would point and point it out like, oh, something's different there. But his parents would always say, oh, don't point, don't. Whereas for me growing up in a primarily Black family, but then definitely multicultural, difference was just our conversation daily. So why is that? Why do I share this? I share this because that's part of the reason why having the dialogue, I think, can be challenging initially. But please just try and reach out for resources. And the more that we practice having these conversations, then the easier it gets for sure. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, now they're rolling in. So,
okay.
All right.
Now I got to cut the answer is short.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
Okay. So the next one is first a thought and then a question. So I think the unconscious part of the definition of racism is scary, especially when you don't mean to speak in a way that offends someone. When you're learning about your own biases and would like to have discussions about them to grow, how do you do it without offending someone or worrying about offending them?
Yeah, and that's just human, right? That's really human in regards to worrying about it. Shoot, I was worried about, am I going to say something wrong about Germantown today? So, right? So it's just human. However, how do you go about, again, I think it's the practice, right? Practicing it. So here's, I think, at the core. How do we become comfortable with being uncomfortable? Because here's the gist of it. My experience has been, let's say that, and I'm going to give you a practical experience real quick, but let's say that there's a group of folks and, I don't know, who am I talking to? Well, I'll give you my experience. So there were a group of folks, I'll give you the background in a moment, but my first time where I was going to engage with a group of people who were all from India, and they were like coming to India to work with me. And so I freaked out, and I have been doing this work, maybe 5 years. I freaked out. I was, so I used to be responsible for new employee orientation globally. I didn't deliver it globally. I had other people that delivered it in some of the locations. I mostly delivered it across the country. But in any case, I had a colleague, and we had a partnership with a company in India. And so my colleague came over, and she's like, hey, Heidi, in your new employee orientation, you're going to have about 20 people, from our new partnership that are coming over. And I literally freaked out. I was hyperventilating. Like, that's how, So anyway, I don't even hyperventilate when I meet a superstar. Anyways, okay. So I'm hyperventilating, and so she's like, Heidi, calm down. And she's like, what's wrong? And I said, well, I don't speak the language. And so she laughed. She laughed with me, but she laughed. And she said, Heidi, the people that are coming over, they all speak English. Because in India, there are thousands of dialects. So English is the, British English, but still English is the primary language spoken. And then from that moment, I paid attention to what was going on in me. But from that moment, man, I have such strong friendships to this day from some of the people who were in the group of the group of employees who came over. So anyways, I could share more about that, but I would say, again, it goes back to one, how do we become comfortable with being uncomfortable? And then secondly, let's continue to practice. So the more that we have the conversation, the easier it'll get. All right, next one. I'm going to try to get shorter. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So are there certain topics that are better with different age groups of kids? Is some info better to address with young versus older children? I'll stop there. There's more, but I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. You know what? Here are just my thoughts. Again, this is doing this work, right, based upon me as a practitioner of this work. But in addition to that, as a parent, I think with younger kids, the concept of diversity, multiculturalism, and inclusion is huge. Here's the other thing, and I have a slide from 2004, 2005 that I was at the Polar Company actually, that I am so looking for. It's based upon census data, but I'm going to try to describe the slide. The slide basically shows demographics of like 0 to 18 years old. So our kids, right, in 1990 and what that looked like. And the gist of it is the majority of the kids who were born in that age group were white. And so 1990, then it did 2000, and then you saw a little shift, right? But then, and I think it was 2014, it might have been sooner, maybe 2007, there was a newspaper article across the country that said the births in that year were now 50-50. And then since then, it's been majority people of color and white. Here's what that means. The multiculturalism of all the protests over the years, those were those same kids. So this conversation about multiculturalism, which then goes into like learning about other cultures is like cool. I think kids really enjoy that. So how do we have the conversation and start there with the younger kids? Okay, did I answer it, Michaela?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then the next part of the question is, how do you support your children when they are challenged on their beliefs about race and racism?
Yeah, so to me, I think some of the understanding, being able to talk about the history and science of race and racism, I think goes there, can help with that. It's hard for me to, though, get into specifics because of, I don't know if they're having a bad experience or they're having a good experience. So, but either way, our kids need support. And here's the other part. It goes back to what I shared in regards to the Kohler Company. My youngest son, I knew before I went on maternity leave that I was going to partner with one of the owners at Kohler, who also happened to be my boss, who is a white woman. And so I knew that we were going to partner and do a presentation about diversity and inclusion with the junior high and high school students. And the topic of our discussion was the world is much more diverse than it is here in Kohler, Wisconsin. And so the gist of it is that when you go off to school or wherever you go off in the world, that's what the conversation was with them of, let's talk about that and how do you feel about that and what might that mean and how do you want to learn more about it? So those were some of the questions that we asked. All right.
Okay, I have one more for you.
Okay.
So this person is asking, do you have recommendations for starting conversations with those who are completely averse to discussions about racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion? Kids always seem open to discussion, but I teach adults and run into this roadblock every once in a while.
Yeah, can you read the last part again? Was it adults run into roadblocks or the kids?
The kids are pretty open to discussion, but this person teaches adults and they run into the roadblock of people being adverse to the discussion at all.
Yeah, so you are the person that really, how much do you know about history? How much do you know the history and science of race? And how much do you know about the history and science of racism? And here's the reason why I say that. It's whatever profession we are in, we master something, whether we're professionally or personally, right? For singers, really great singers will master singing, right? They understand their vocal cords, they understand how to hit notes. Musicians as well, right, can play. Or if we're an educator, and we're an educator in science, for example, we know our craft. Some of us are really, really good parents. And so all of us are really good parents, but, some of us like really get into it. And so in any case, even when I was at McDonald's, I could make a burger and I made it by the book, kind of thing. So we all have these areas that we can be experts in. And so when we're experts in those areas, and I'm not by any means saying you should become an expert on race and racism, I'm just suggesting that if you understand the history and the science of race and racism, then you could have a similar kind of experience. When we're an expert in something, and someone comes to us and they say something that is just not true, like, we don't get angry. We might try to help them. We'll try to help educate them. And if they don't want to hear it because they believe it, but we know it's absolutely not true, like that's the place, that's the state that many of us, I think, and I hope, can get to around the concepts of race and racism because we understand the history of it. We don't have to understand all the history, but I think we need to understand enough of it so that then when we have the conversation, we're coming from a place that's based upon data, that's based upon information, that's based upon, knowledge. So I know we are at time because I need to turn it over to Jenny. I would, could go on and on and on and have lots of stories I could share from a personal standpoint, but I really hope at least this was helpful in some way. And thank you so much for participating and helping it to be engaging. And, again, these are big topics, so 1 hour discussion could never really cover it all, but hopefully it's a good start for the next step. So Jenny, back to you.
Thank you.
Jenny, can I sneak in? Sorry.
Oh, yes.
So there's several people in the chat just asking you, Heidi, if you would be able to recommend resources to start learning more about the history and science of race and racism. And if that's not something you have like right now, you could also send it to me and I could share it out as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and actually, can we go to the next slide? I'm sorry, Jenny, real quick. So here are just a couple of resources. And so Race, The Power of an Illusion, it's actually Milwaukee Public, not the school, not the library, PBS, thank you, PBS. Actually, this is work that PBS did, and there's videos and all that kind of stuff. But the website has tons of information, so that might be a place to start. The Harvard implicit bias test, that really helps you to assess you. Now, you have to be really courageous, right? You got to be ready to say, okay, I'm ready to see what it is, where is my work, but that absolutely, it's free, and it has a lot of information there at that site as well. And then I invite you to visit, and I saw it in the chat, Froedtert, Froedtert.com/in-racism. So I saw that in the chat. But also this link here, we have Dr. Kamara Jones. You can look her up. She's an epidemiologist, but in addition to that, she really focuses on the impact of structural and institutionalized racism, systemic racism on healthcare. But the thing about it is she uses allegories, and they're so amazing that they help with the definitions of all this stuff, in addition to, from a practical standpoint, what to do next. So I would say go there, and those allegories actually could probably be good for high schoolers as well. All right, thank you. Thanks so much, Michaela. Okay, Jenny, 1 minute we got.
No, thank you so much, Heidi. And a lot of these resources we're going to send out afterwards. And also the recording from the session will be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll also publish when that's available as well. It just takes a little bit of time to do some magic. We also have a survey. Topics like this come from concerned parents and community members, and we then seek out the speakers to bring these educational sessions to the community. So if there are ever topics in the future that you want to learn more about, or things that you want some resources to be able to bridge those conversations or know where to go when you need help, that's what we try to be here for you. And these sessions are designed around content that you are asking for. So thank you for all of your suggestions to help make these relevant to what's going on in the schools, community, and just in all of our lives. On a personal note, as a graduate of Germantown, I know that my work that I've been able to do in D&I, in addition to my regular roles in companies, global companies, and also local companies, has helped me make so many new connections, develop skills that I use in my career, and be able to move from a support role into an individual contributor role, and also be a leader in my community. So they're absolutely, positively, and I can say that wholeheartedly, skills that I didn't necessarily have full access to based on my upbringing as well, even in the community, but appreciate all the community members and resources that I can reach out to help, reach potentials and goals that I want to reach. So obviously I'm here as part of the organization and work with all of these great people to help if the youth in our community want to also pursue things, to be able to connect them to, live out their best lives as well. As far as opportunities with our board, we're always looking for new parent members and professional members to help round out our board. Or if you have any questions, president at gtownyouthfutures.com. We have a Facebook page, and also on the emails that come out. Our upcoming events that we have will be participating in the 4th of July events and Taste of Germantown. We also have a fundraiser night to help bring more activities to the community on Tuesday, May 18th, next week at Qdoba, Menominee Falls. Our Facebook page has the information on that. And our other event that's coming up too is our disc golf extravaganza on Tuesday, August 10th, and we'll be promoting some of those as well. So not only do we do some of the education, but we also try to provide activities, multi-generational, family friendly in the community. And thank you again for participating. You know, it's people like you that help make these programs what they are, and offer things that people are interested in that keeps it going. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Michaela, and everyone else. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.